Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the MaxLove Project Podcast. Today we have Miriam, author of Keto for Cancer, and today we're going to just touch on and discuss keto for cancer with the pediatric population. And I think safe to say that this will be specific to brain tumor patients, so pediatric brain tumors. So Miriam, I would love for you to just give a little intro. We'll have your bio in the copy below the video, but if you could just introduce yourself
Sure.
first, that'd be great.
Yep. All right. I'm Miriam Kalamian, and this is my specialty, keto for cancer, brain tumors in children. I don't specifically work with children anymore on this because you guys can do that part of it. You can fill that gap. But yeah, to take it back in time, in 2004, my 4-year-old son got diagnosed with a brain tumor. So it was the size of an orange in a 4-year-old's head. So that's what has really stood out to me all these years since, is the size of an orange. How could this be? You know, we saw some changes in behavior, but nothing that would have suggested that until a vision exam. So now it is Christmas Eve day. We get this biopsy and we learn this. And the next day, it was about 250,000 people died in a tsunami in Indonesia. And I was not even aware of that. I was so hyper-focused on this one little guy. So my son, Raffi, went through the standard of care for this. It was a juvenile pilocytic astrocytoma, but if they were doing testing on that tumor now, they would have found something that made it as horribly aggressive as it was. Right. But they didn't have that information back then, and the standard of care, 54 weeks of basically weekly chemotherapy infusions, it might have slowed it, but it didn't stop it. And a couple of months after we stopped that, we first post-session MRI showed that it was lit up like a Christmas tree, was the words that were used. Again, stands out in my mind. And now we're scrambling with what to do. So we did more chemotherapy. We did 2 surgeries. We did a clinical trial. It was all failing. And he was getting more and more compromised with each new therapy. And then I was researching one of the drugs they wanted to put him on for palliative. This is palliative now. He's not quite 7, palliative care. And the drug was Cytoxin, and I go online, I find something, but I'm at my mom's house, and her printer, which she never used, inkjet, make it worse, wouldn't print what I wanted to print. So I went back to it a few days later. I bookmarked it, went back. And when I went to that same page, instead of being the information on that drug, there was a new report, a media report in Science Daily. I keep it here. Ketogenic diet in a mouse model of glioma. So it was a restricted ketogenic diet, which means it was calorie restricted. And the model they were using was the diet for epilepsy for children. And they referred to a paper that had been written by a researcher doing her doctorate. She speculated that a diet like this might interfere with the uptake of glucose by the tumors, and PET imaging had become feasible and at that point in time. And sure enough, in 8 weeks on a ketogenic diet, both of these kids showed reduced uptake that goes by about 21%. And I'm reading this and going, how can this be? I know I'm not supposed to be considering mouse model research. It's far away from, being in people, but it's a diet, it's food. And what have we got to lose? What have we got to lose? So I contacted the lab. I contacted one of the authors on the paper, and Dr. Seyfried, within a couple hours, was responding to that and sending me what information he had. And that's how I found out about the using the diet at Johns Hopkins. I got connected with the Abrams family, and then I go to this conference, and I was just blown away by what I learned there. But in the meantime, just to back it up a little, we put Raffi on this diet, and with that first MRI, which was 3 months, I mean, we get an MRI, it's growing. We put him on the diet. 3 months later, it's pulled back about 10 or 15%. And it's like, how can this be? How can this be? So I really had to learn everything I could at that point, because I suspected it could be a lot better implemented than what I was doing. And I talked to Beth at the Charlie Foundation. I basically had to, beg her to speak with me because it was so off label at that time. She cleared it up in about an hour and a half, what I was doing wrong. And within a month, I was in a program, a master's program in human nutrition. And that was my focus. And that was 2007, he started the diet. That summer, I started the program. 2010, I graduated from the program, and I've been doing this ever since. So Raffi, he had a good quality of life in the 6 years that he was with us beyond the start of the diet. And that is so precious to my husband and I. There's just nothing to compare with being able to get those 6 years instead of the palliative care they were moving him to, which would have meant hospitalizations, transfusions, and infections. Yeah. So I just like, how can you not consider diet? How can you not?
Your story is so inspiring with Raffi, and I think I appreciate it so much because it was one of those stories that, when Camila was diagnosed, that kept me going. It was one of those stories that, made me keep going, to learn more, to believe in what I was doing, and to help her. So I really thank you, and the work that you chose to do in honor of Raffi and for him, I think.
And you guys, you have people with the same kind of tumor that Raffi had, and they're thriving because they didn't have to go through all that other stuff before they came to the diet. And that's what is important, is to get this information to families. And they're going to do with it what they want to do with it, but to get the information out there, because it's not something, it's like, even now, a kid gets diagnosed with a devastating tumor like that. The oncologist isn't talking about diet. They're talking about treatments.
Still today. And Miriam, I mean, to put this into perspective, from my point of view, when it comes to starting MaxLove Project, so Raffi started the diet in 2007. That was the year Max was born. He was diagnosed in 2011 and it's very similar to Raffi's case on so many levels. It's just we're able to learn more molecularly about what motivates that low-grade tumor to be a high-grade presenting, right? And by, Max was diagnosed 2011, and by 2013, we're on the diet because of you. And when we started, you supported us, you helped us. And I look back at that and I think, how are you doing this in 2007? I mean, it was one thing to be doing this in 2012, 2013 and beyond. And then now today there's so many resources. But when we started, there was nothing on the market. People said we were crazy. We were told that we were going to harm our child. We had terrifying, right? We had doctors say that we were going to starve our child's brain of the only fuel it can use. And I look back at that and my mind is blown, because you were starting this when the initial kind of research flame was reignited, you know what I mean? And you were doing this when there was no support. There were not dietitians in this area, right?
Yeah, like I said, I had to beg Beth to
You
speak
paved
to
the
me.
way.
Yeah, but what she did allow early on was for me to join a moderated group. There were 2 moms whose kids were on a modified Atkins for epilepsy. And I was allowed onto that group, and those moms were basically my source of information, that the enabling paper on the case study of those kids. And then the Johns Hopkins 4th edition had just come out in February. And like weeks before we came to this point of needing that. And I'll tell you, it was scary. And Raffi, you fast a little kid like that, because that's how they started the diet back then in most centers. You fast a little kid like that. He just turned 7, and he was like in metabolic acidosis by evening. So I recognized the signs because they were in the book. because I had studied this. What could we be doing to harm him? And I had the orange juice ready, and I gave him a couple of tablespoons of the orange juice, and he was fine. But yeah, terrifying, because I thought I could harm him. But it's like, well, what is going to harm him more? Me changing the way he eats, or putting him in palliative care? And then they weren't
100%.
expecting much of that. Yeah.
100%. And from our experience with this, like mitigating the harm. So Max also failed off of those chemos, and sure, it was the same frontline chemo. And then he did the high risk protocol. I mean, the high grade protocol, failed off that. And going into radiation, I can't imagine, and I imagine, Sam, you feel similarly from your experience. I can't imagine doing that with that child not in ketosis. Right. I couldn't imagine those surgeries he had not being in ketosis, because of how that protected him, because of how healthy he was going into these processes, right? And now I've got, a kid who, in our case, still has these tumors throughout his brainstem, and is like working so hard at physics and doing this physics homework. And I think, what would have happened if he did not do the ketogenic diet during that time, during radiation? Look at all the risk factors, right?
I know.
And you paved the way. Another thing about Raffi's story that I think is absolutely profound, that we need more discussions around, is the symptom management and issues around hypothalamic obesity. And you've helped many of our families with this in the past, and just passing on the knowledge of what you gained. Most neuroendocrinologists will say to these kids, these parents, there's nothing you can do.
That's exactly what we were told. You know what we were told by the endocrinologist and the dietitian associated with the center was to like wash some veggies and put them in a box, and that's what he could have in the fridge. And it's like, no, you don't get it. I'm taking like a 10-minute break, and my kid is out eating green tomatoes off the vine. He's eating dog biscuits that the dog left on the floor. He's picking up windfall pears with yellow jackets in them. It's a 24/7, literally a 24/7 job.
Right.
So, and then when it was all working, and the endocrinologist said, this was a different one than the one we started with, but we went through a lot of them, as you might imagine. So he said, well, it might have worked for you, but it's too hard for families. And it's like, at that point, I knew it wasn't too hard for families, because I'd talked to a few of them, and they were able to do it as we were able to do it. So what's this about being too hard? No, I said, what's hard is you're sitting in the waiting room and, through a surgery, and you don't know what, if anything, you're going to get at the end of the day. That was exactly my feeling. Was like, this is a walk in the park. I know Jim Abrams calls it a walk on the beach, but we, we live near a park, so it's the walk in the park.
Oh my gosh, it's just such an amazing story.
And I want to bring this up too, because this is early on. This is before, as I was learning about the diet, there had been a group. It was a moderated form for parents of low-grade gliomas, kids with low-grade gliomas. And I had found out about the diet, and we were doing it. I was trying to get some information from this group. Had anybody, else ever tried this? And the moderator got back to me and said that, well, first, it took 4 days for her to get back to me, because she had to clear whether or not she could even post something like this on the site with the other moderators. So she gets back and says that, she has heard, she was sort of, in the mindset of maybe it could do something, but she couldn't see doing it with her daughter, because her daughter loved, it was chocolate chip cookie dough ice cream. And how could she deprive her daughter of that? And I'm thinking, ice cream or my kid's life, and there's no equivalency there. And then, Audra, I was at your house, and you're serving strawberry cupcakes with buttercream frosting, homemade, just right then. And we're eating these, and it's like, who wouldn't love this? Who wouldn't love some homemade ice cream for breakfast?
Right?
What kid would see this as a restriction or a deprivation? So it's just changing up. It's substituting, substituting what you call them training wheels. But it's like in my adult world, we call them just substitutions. You can substitute just about anything, and the world has exploded since 2007 and the time that, when you started, with the options that are available now. Some of them are junk, but sometimes you need a little something like that to ease the burden as a parent and have something that feels normal to your kid. I actually went so far as to buy Dannon yogurt, throw the yogurt away, fill the container with what I wanted for my son, and send him off to school with that, so that he could feel, like he said, like a big kid. I want to feel like a big kid.
Smart. So smart. Miriam, you brought something up that I think is just such an important point to make, because we're talking about the cost benefit analysis that a lot of parents go through when they're thinking about learning how to do this. Will it pay off? And so often what we hear is, will this be something that is curative? Is it worth it? Will it lead to an ultimate outcome that I'm looking for? And what you brought up from the very beginning is the incredible power of quality of life, of Raffi's quality of life. Yeah. That was what our goal was as well. It was just, let's give the best days possible. Sam, I know this was yours also. Would you mind talking more about that? Like, maybe to parents who might be like, well, I'm looking for, we come in kind of at first really, really traumatized and desperate to look for a cure. But you've both experienced, I think both Miriam and Sam.
Well, you come to the realization that your kid's not going to have a normal life and a normal lifespan. And Raffi had a prom thrown in his honor in 2nd grade. And so there was there's endless stories like that. And that wouldn't have happened. He wouldn't have made it to 2nd grade. He wouldn't have made it to that prom. So you just, but as far as the quality of life goes, my son was blind in one eye. He had, it was, what do they call it? 2800 in his left eye, and a field cut in his right eye. And we're driving, this about a couple of months after he started the diet, and it was even before the MRI. And we're driving down the road, and he says, "Mom, trees have color." And I said,
"Oh, I love that."
Huh? He said, "The trees have color." And it was like, oh, wow. So we did an exam, 2100, and obviously getting some color perception. I didn't even realize the color perception had been impaired. We never did get the field cut managed, but he had better vision in his left eye. So other things, he had better energy. He really liked going to school. He was a very, very, wanted to be around people, mostly around adults. He really loved the adults and he loved the attention. And the adults in his environment at school were very supportive, and they managed the interactions with the other kids, because Raffi had expressive aphasia. So he had difficulty getting the words out. And sometimes the teachers had to help him with that. But, the quality of life, we could go places. We did what was called the hot springs tour, because he loved hot springs. So we just go around all these different hot springs with our travel trailer. We could visit family. We could, there were all kinds of things that we weren't going to be able to do if our kid was stuck in a hospital bed somewhere, receiving toxic therapies that weren't going to cure. So this is not, and I emphasize that with my adult clients with brain cancer, is this is not a cure, because I asked that on the intake. What are your goals? And sometimes it's like to slow this down, to to manage this while I do this, to feel a little better. But sometimes they'll say to cure the cancer, and it's like, we got to address that. This is not going to cure the cancer. This is not going to cure a glioma, but oh my God, it can improve. And then one of the things, when I first met Jethro Hu, and for those of you listening who don't know who he is a neuro-oncologist at Cedars-Sinai and in California. And he came to the diet through a patient of his who had found it somehow and said he wanted to do it. So Dr. Hu sent him to the RD, and instead of getting the blowback, Sam, that you got, and I'm sure you got, Audra, the RD, LJ Emerald, said, well, let me look into it. And when she looked into it, she felt she could be supportive of it. And that's a whole center over there. That is incredible. Supportive. So they're not doing anything any different than somebody
Yep.
could do without being at that
Right.
hospital. But it's wonderful to get that kind of support within
Yeah.
the institution you're going to. So, I don't even know where I was going with that.
No,
but-
no. You have gone there. And what strikes me hearing you is these
quality of life.
quality of life, these beautiful moments, and the time that you had together and your presence in that time together. And I feel like this is not to, I understand we all come in looking for a cure, but the reframing that you went through, it feels to me like you were able to be present. And I know Sam was in her journey as well. And I wonder if that's partially because you come out of the space of everything being not enough because it's not a cure.
Mhm.
And you come into the space of presence into the day-to-day and what it is to live your best days together,
Mhm.
like
Yes,
whatever
live-
that is.
Live the best life,
Yeah.
whatever it is, for as long as you got, because, to be
Yeah.
honest, none of us know.
Yeah,
We had that insight into our kids, into
Mhm.
our kids,
Right.
but none of us really know. And what I was going to say about Dr. Who was, when I first met him, he said, that he had thought that it might help because the mechanism seemed pretty
Mhm.
sound. But what he didn't realize was the amazing quality of life that people
Mm.
had going through the standard care. He said, instead of coming in and, and they're dizzy and they're this and they're that, they were like out there doing things, living their lives. And
Mhm.
that to him was like, why shouldn't we be supporting
Yeah.
this?
Yeah, I'd love to touch on that because I think that's one of the biggest, like aha moments even Camila's team saw. Like she went through radiation, she didn't need steroids. She had DIPG, which, all of our kids had, a brainstem area kind of
Yeah.
tumor. And that's detrimental, like to get treatment there. Like it's, a very important area of the brain. And, she didn't need steroids. She was able to, go through treatment unsedated. And it was almost like she was just like we talk about protected throughout the treatment. And I'd love to hear, how is even one, what is ketosis, right? And how can it even, what is the mechanisms that you're mentioning on how it could protect these kids through the treatments that are prevalent in pediatric brain tumors?
Well, Sam, what you said about the doctor saying, is it the Audra said the doctor said it was the only glucose was the only fuel for the brain. And that's when I was doing the undergraduate work for my nutrition degree. That's the bill of goods they were trying to sell was, and I had to answer yes on the quizzes or I would be, dinged for that. But it's just simply not true that the brain can use in a super ketosis. The brain can use like that for 60% of its energy needs, and the brain is a real energy hog. So if 60% of the brain's energy needs can be met through ketones, and ketones they lower inflammation. Don't we all want less inflammation in the brains of our children and for us as adults? It's a preferred, if you have glucose here and ketones here, the normal cells are going to prefer the ketones. So why wouldn't we want to go there? So the only way to get into ketosis in 2007 was to carbohydrate restrict. And when you take out the carbohydrates, the shift that happens in the body is, we're never going to see, any more sugar. So we better do something about this quick or we're going to fall apart. So in the absence of carbohydrate, the body takes the fats, runs the fats through energy where it can, like in the muscle tissue, heart tissue, it can run that. And there becomes an excess of a little molecule that then goes to the liver. And the liver says, I know what to do with that. Let's synthesize some ketones right here. And the liver doesn't use them, so it puts them right back out into circulation. So we have this marvelous mechanism from just our the changes in our in order for us to survive, I guess you could say, survival mechanism, so that our big brains could still function if we didn't have access to food. So think about it. I mean, you don't have access for food 100,000 years ago. if you didn't have carbs to eat, you had to have something that would enable you to track down the next animal you were going to eat, or to do whatever to get the next food in you. So a marvelous adaptation, and our bodies, it's amazing to see this happen. I see it all the time and again, with people coming into it, not even sure that they can do it, but they're highly motivated, and boom, there comes a point where their bodies are saying, yes, I know what to do here.
Right. It's a natural process. It's a natural process. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that that is in the space of ketosis is scary. It means you're starving. It means like all these negative connotations, when in reality it is a natural process. You're probably in ketosis as you sleep. If you eat a whole foods good diet, when you're sleeping, it is likely your child's in ketosis, you're in ketosis, and you wake up in ketosis. So it's a natural state that the body goes through when it isn't immediately digesting, sugars from your diet. So I think that's a huge point to bring up, is that this is a natural process, and your child's body knows what to do. Your body knows what to do. It's not anything. And if you want to explain too, I think part of the fear comes from ketoacidosis, which you mentioned Raffi went through, which is a different state, right?
Actually, what Raffi went through was more of a metabolic acidosis. A ketoacidosis, in my mind, is like, it's the presence of two things simultaneously.
Yeah.
Right.
It's the high sugar level in the blood and the high ketones at the same time.
Right.
That's ketoacidosis. And that happens with kids who are like type 1, who have developed type 1 diabetes. And all of a sudden now they're dehydrated and they're in ketoacidosis because their bodies can't use the sugar that's in the bloodstream because there's no insulin to move it out of the bloodstream and into the tissue. And so then it tries to make up for that by creating ketones, but you can't do that. You have to get the glucose out of the bloodstream. Raffi was in metabolic acidosis, which was more of a, only because he was a young child that I had fasted all day. And that was one of the risk factors that was talked about in the book. I don't see that happen with my adult clients because I have a management protocol for that.
It's more manageable nowadays. We know what to do. And I'd love to touch on, you could even label like the founder, or like, you were in the space with Raffi in the beginning. And I would love your vantage point of, since you started it with Raffi in 2007 into what it is today and what you do today to help pediatric brain tumor patients within your practice. How has that changed for Keto for Cancer, like the term Keto for Cancer? Because I think it has evolved. And what does Keto for Cancer look like now with the new knowledge that we have today?
Okay. Keto for Cancer now looks like, in my world, more like an adjunct treatment. So you have the medical, you have the the oncology, looking at chemo, surgery, radiation, and some immunotherapy drugs. But what we really need on board at every medical center in the nation and globally is a metabolic oncologist, somebody who can look at what's going on in that person's body.
Can you imagine?
And start thinking about how can we support the normal functioning activities and still be able to offer some therapies that might be able to kill cancer cells. So it's that metabolic component is missing in oncology. They talk about it in the research, they identify it in the papers, but then they're just like chasing these individual pathways. So they say, well, this pathway, well, it's okay. I compare it to, if you look at the big metabolic map, right? And I have a slide that is like, this is the big metabolic map. And I go, okay, now just imagine all of those different pathways have to be working. They have to be coordinating and speaking to one another in order for this to work properly. Well, with cancer, you've got something going on here. But do you treat it by throwing in like 50 different things that are only going to like stop traffic here and move it here? No, you want to get a handle on the things that are going to bring that whole scene back into balance again, not to go after a single pathway. I see a lot of times, people come they've got 40 or 50 different medications and supplements. And I go, okay, put them all on that metabolic map. You're going to have some pretty spectacular crashes, because this one, we need the police out there to patrol, and we need the support people to put out the fires, but we don't need all this other traffic. We don't need the horse carts on the road. And we don't need all this other stuff that's going to get in the way. And that's what happens with 40 or 50 different drugs and supplements. The interactions between them are unmanageable. And I don't see those getting people to the same good place and good quality of life as I see a few that really are important for that particular person, and maybe for, more specifically to their cancer.
And what you're speaking to, it reminds me of Dr. Sheck, which will also be on the podcast. I remember she has a slide where she basically shows, ketogenic diet, the way it's defined is like your body makes ketone bodies. And she kind of shows what the ketone body, beta hydroxybutyrate, and it shows, the hallmarks of cancer and all these pathways that you're talking about. And she kind of checks off what a ketone body can, work
beautiful.
with. In all the hallmarks of cancer, kind of showing that even just being in this metabolic state, you're already checking off all these pathways that are active in a lot of, specifically brain cancer pathways and
angiogenesis, apoptosis, all of those things, HDAC inhibition, all of those things are that ketone molecule is just golden. And if you can lower inflammation, which is what you guys were talking about for the radiation, if you can lower inflammation, then the brain is such a confined space. And so lowering inflammation in there while you're hitting it with something like radiation that is undoubtedly causing inflammation. One more thing I can say about Raffi here was he never did have radiation, so it was like off the table early on because the tumor was just so big and so infiltrated. And then even after the surgery, where they had debulked a little bit of it, it got brought up again. And there was a point where I asked the neuro-oncologist, it's like, because he brought up radiation again. And I said, well, will it help with the symptoms? And he said, no, I don't think so. And I mean, it was an honest question on my part. It's like, well, then why would we do it? And he said, well, because now he's old enough. I was like, no, that's not. Old enough is not an excuse.
Not a reason.
No, we should have like a pod, and I can think of a lot of people we could add to it, called Now Mom. All the things that we were told as mothers. Now Mom.
Now Mom. Oh, that's so good.
That is good. I think that's great. I think
it was Nancy Abrams that initially said that. It was like, now Mom. So
but,
I mean, we've all heard it.
Yeah, we've all heard it.
Yeah, it's true.
Call me Mom.
So moving into, I think, so what I hear is you view ketogenic, the presence of ketones as a great adjunct therapy for what a lot of these kids go through. And I'd like to also just add on, we talk about the beginning, 2007, when you had to do it, and you were following an epilepsy diet, right? Because that was what was available.
Out to the second decimal point.
Yeah.
Which, it took a while for 3 years. 3 years for me to understand that in brain cancer, you don't need to have the perfect neurotransmitter balance.
Yes. Thank you.
And that's what I think. For our listeners, a ketogenic diet for epilepsy is based on ratios. It's based on measuring your food. It's based on, getting the specific amount of grams of fat for the disease, which in epilepsy, it's like an overactive brain, right? So it's the science is this epilepsy with all these measurements, very strict, helps calm that down. For brain tumors, right, it's what we've learned is that it doesn't need to be that measured. It's more based on your blood measurements. So I don't know if you want to expand on that and just because I think that's important. I think a lot of the fear again too is how strict it is. And when we talk about keto for cancer, keto for brain tumors, how does it now diverge from an epilepsy diet?
Yes. perfect. Thank you for asking
Yep.
that, because
Yep.
that's a big thing I have to work through with the families that I work with. And
Mhm.
again, I'm working with adults, but I also have that experience of having not just my son, but having worked with children in the past. So yeah, so that diet, it's what I think you alluded to it before about a 4-to-1 diet, which means
Mhm.
that for every combined carb plus protein gram, you are
Mhm.
matching that with 4 grams of fat in the same meal. We're not talking calorie. That's where I had
Right.
made the mistake early on. This is grams, and I wasn't
Yeah.
used to thinking of anything in terms of grams. It was all about
Mhm.
calories.
Who is?
So, yeah, really,
Right. Yeah.
really. But because it had been designed by doctors and dietitians,
Yeah.
registered dietitians, they were doing that thing. And they don't keep the kids on that indefinitely.
Mhm.
It's to gain control over the epilepsy and then see where they can go from there. Hopefully pull them off like they did with Charlie, and they're still seizure free.
Yep.
So so that 4-to-1 diet is what I read about in the Johns Hopkins book. But what the moms on that modified Atkins group, and this was sort of brand new, that was Eric Kossoff's thing over at Johns Hopkins.
Yeah.
What was brand new about that was, okay, so you keep the carbs under 20, okay, and you don't push as far as the protein and the fats go. You just kind of let them self-select on that. And there are clients that's my preferred way of doing it. It may not be
Yeah.
as low as 20. It might be 40 or 50 grams of
Yeah.
carb, depending on where they're at. But when I work with people with brain
Mhm.
cancer, I do start at 20 because I
Mhm.
want them to get the benefit straight up.
Mhm.
Let's
And
go
is
right
that
for it.
is that 20 combined, or are you doing are you
Generally, I say 20 grams net grams of
net?
carb, and
Okay,
I
great. Yeah.
manage the protein
Yep.
pretty tight in the beginning. And once they are in ketosis, and I'm looking at the labs,
Mhm.
not the lab, the measurements they're getting from like a Keto Mojo or Precision Extrameter. If they're in ketosis, then great, we can keep it there. If they're not in ketosis, we might have to tighten it up, or just accept the fact that if they're on like dexamethasone,
Yeah.
it's going to impair their numbers. But my goal in working with people is to hit it as hard as you can in the first few months, especially if they're
Mhm.
going through radiation. And it may need a ketone supplement. I use ketone supplements
Mhm.
very freely. So they may need a ketone supplement to boost the ketones up to
Yep.
get the protection they need in the brain if they can't get there naturally. Kids, they get there. But adults, so
It's easier for kids.
Mhm.
Yeah.
much easier
Yep.
for kids because they're much more tolerant of
Mhm.
MCT oil too. So you can just add it everywhere.
100%.
Yeah. So that was where it came from. And I just was running into trouble with it all the time by people wanting 4-to-1 diets. And I started, it's like, no, this guy, he's overweight. What does he need to have
Yeah.
like a diet that's with 17 tablespoons of fat in it to maintain that? No.
No.
But if we calorie restrict that person,
Yeah.
which Dr.
Yeah.
Seyfried's research had shown was more effective, if we calorie restrict that person, what are we going to restrict? They're already restricted on the carbs. We're already managing the protein. So the thing we're restricting is the fat. And when you start restricting the fat, most of my adult clients are more at like a 2-to-1. And I've simplified it even further because it is so hard for people for most people to get a handle on that. So I'll say, okay, so because I want them to be aware of how much protein, kind of a protein forward thinking. So for every gram of protein, 2 grams of fat. And they go, oh, okay. So they understand that a lot better than this adding the protein and the carb. And if they're at 20 grams of carb and it's spread out over 3 meals, that is such a little number, I don't really care, because I'm not going for that second decimal point here. I'm going for what's working in their body right now, and maybe 2 months from now, we'll switch it up.
And
That's a great point.
What's always helped me, and I'm thinking about it on a plate, right? To visualize what this could mean, on a plate, what you're feeding your kid. And I remember it was Audra's advice in the beginning of if your child's ever eating a piece of protein, a piece of chicken, piece of steak, always have it with a fat. So for me, that was like making, like a sauce, like a fat sauce, like a mushroom cream sauce on a steak, a chimichurri. It's always like thinking about it that way of like, you don't even have to measure as much if you just have these you know, little, like if you're having protein, have it with a fat no matter what, you know,
Fat
just,
bombs.
yeah.
You have fat
Fat bombs. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Sam, you were doing what Miriam, I love how you framed it, because I think you put into words what we were trying to get at ourselves, which was you keep that bank of carbohydrate of 20 grams. You keep that bank,
Yeah.
you figure out how you're going to allocate it for net carbs, right?
Mhm,
And then you have the ratio of the protein to fat.
just protein and fat. Yeah.
And that's it. And it's just so much easier. Yeah.
Yeah. So some, some of the people, if they're underweight or it might be a 3-to-1. I have a client right now. She's a medical doctor in her 60s, managing GBM with a little lower protein than I would have liked to see, but it's working beautifully for her. So it's like she's not losing muscle mass. She's been tracking that. And she's doing more of a 3-to-1. And she gets to that 3-to-1 by using MCT oil. She's not even using an expensive ketone supplement. She's just using MCT oil, but she's using a lot of the emulsified version of it. And there's one that's come out more recently, like, I don't know how recently really, but I've just become more aware of it. And it's online. So, I've been recommending that to my clients, especially since adults don't seem to be super tolerant. I'm not super tolerant of MCT oil. I can only take in about a half a tablespoon before I get some kind of GI from it. And I find that's true most of my adult clients, but this emulsified version, because the fat is already kind of ready for digestion, and it's not hitting the liver in quite the same way. With MCT oil, one of the beauties of it really is that when it leaves the stomach and enters the intestine, the second it hits the duodenum, it's absorbed through the intestinal wall there and into the hepatic capillary bed there that feeds the portal vein that goes to the liver, and it gets converted into ketones and it goes right back out in the bloodstream. And it's a great energy source, and kids thrive on that, but adults have problems with it, especially if there's digestive. I mean, who doesn't have something going on when they're older? So the other thing about emphasizing covering is it's like covering the protein with fat, is if you have the fat sort of at the start of the meal or beginning of the meal, it slows gastric emptying, and that allows the food that's going through the digestive process to enter the bloodstream at a slower rate. And the same amount of glucose eventually is going to get into the system, but you're not going to need that surge of insulin in order to move it out of the bloodstream. And this is like something, this is getting a little more into the weeds here, but I bring up with my clients that insulin is a growth promoter. It's an anabolic hormone. So it's not just about moving glucose out of the bloodstream. It's about stimulating receptors, insulin receptors on the cancer cells, because they have many, many more of it. They want to grow and make many more of themselves. So they, we want to dampen that process, but not in the muscle. So we time exercise around, the exercise, and kids really need to do this too, but they do it more spontaneously. You want to build and maintain muscle, but not feed the tumor. So it's setting up a competition for nutrients by keeping physically active. It's our best metabolic regulator, muscle tissue. And it's just, like I said, it comes more naturally to kids if they're experiencing a good quality of life. And if they're symptomatic, they're like drawn out from all the things that are happening and they're just lying on the couch all day, that's not helping them. Yeah.
And there's a reason. What I picture is like there's a reason, that spurt of energy right after dinner, right before bed, where kids just go crazy all over the house. There's a reason for that. And it's what you're saying, if, just that surge in energy and what the body's doing, right? So it could be even just a walk after dinner could really help your child.
A walk after meals, exercise before and walks after.
Yeah.
And what a great family time. I mean, if you can get out and you get out of the, constantly thinking of the negatives of this, and you get out in nature with your kid, and some of our best moments were in the park, or, going to the beach, or just hanging out at the hot springs. Some of those times, wow.
Yeah, no. And I think to tie this all together and kind of give a picture for a family listening to this. And also there's a lot of information in our keto guide in our app that kind of talks more, if you feel like you're in the weeds with what we're talking about, there will be show notes. And also in our keto guide, we kind of walk through a lot of this science. But if you were to give, a pediatric brain tumor family, they just got diagnosed, they're considering this to help their child through treatment. What would be, the top 3 things that they could do by themselves,
By themselves.
while they educate themselves? Yeah.
Well, you guys, great information. So when I get contacted by a family, I always send them to you. For certain pediatric cancers, there's an integrative doctor whose daughter has leukemia. And I think she's been a great support for a lot of families. Educate it's like, great. I mean, Audrey, you tried to do this. You tried to educate the team, and you made more headway in that than I was ever able to do. But find your support where you can, where the big centers, the important ones in the brain tumor, the pediatric brain tumor world, didn't want to hear it. Shut me down immediately. But our local oncologist, who is actually administering these treatments, and our local pediatrician, who lived a few blocks from here, he saw my kid all the time. And he saw the changes in him with the diet and became very, very supportive. But I had that kind of support so that I knew I wasn't hurting my kid. I had the pediatrician looking at his labs as well as the oncologist looking at his MRIs. And it was a different world of being able to find your support. So unfortunately, you do have to cobble this together on your own. There's no place you can go to where you're going to get all of that support provided to you in an easy kind of way. So yeah, it's not an easy path to follow, but the alternative is not easy to follow either. Yeah, it's just simpler. It's simpler just to do what they told you to do and not think of anything. So the second part of that would be to get your information and your support from trusted sources. So, and I think that's a really hard thing for a lot of families, because once you connect with something on the, online, if it's a video, the algorithms are set up so that they're going to feed you more information, but it may start to diverge from what is actually beneficial for your kids. So I see some parents going, not just parents, some of the families that I work with, spending enormous amounts of money on stuff that is has no value at all, because they're not able to separate out fact from fiction in this world, the mountain of misinformation that's out there. So I spend a lot of time educating. I used to be more tactful about it. Now I just call it out when I see it. But yeah, it's just unfortunate. I don't get into arguments with people. I say, these are the resources that I trust. I share the resources that I trust. And if you follow these people, you're not going to be led down the wrong path. But I don't know what you guys faced when you went in there, when you first got into looking at stuff online. But my husband and I would be very thoughtful about everything we were looking at. And there's some things that are like hyperbaric oxygen. Man, that would have been a great thing for us to think about back then. But it wasn't even out there really as a therapy. There was one child that was using it back in probably 2009 or 2010. And I thought, well, that's odd. I wonder what that's about. And since then, I've learned what it's about. It's about pushing oxygen into a tumor that really doesn't want oxygen on board. It's learned to function just nicely, thank you. And by being hypoxic, it gets to send hypoxic, meaning can thrive in an oxygen depleted environment. So by being hypoxic, it then changes the signaling, and the signaling says, okay, we need more blood vessels to bring the nutrients to us, not necessarily oxygen, because we're not going to use it, but bring that glucose in. Let's bring, and some of these amino acids that might be beneficial. Let's bring them all in by making a new, and that's what angiogenesis is all about. It's that sloppy network of blood vessels to feed the tumor.
So
Yeah.
when you No, go ahead. Sorry. No, go ahead.
When you're fasting or following a ketogenic diet, the body reverts back to that state where it says, uh-oh, we're in survival mode right now. So let's shut down all this extraneous activity. And, and we're just going to feed what we need to feed to keep ourselves alive right here.
Mhm.
So that angiogenesis, that's what we initially saw with Raffi, was in that first 3 months of calorie restricting, carb restricting, managing the protein. We saw that that shrinking back, that 10 to 15% of regression was coming from that network of blood vessels all of a sudden not functioning the way they had been, with more growth. So yeah, the signaling, to normalize the cell signaling is and reverse some of the epigenetic influences that have happened in there. And that's, I think, is going to be where, like, the future of this. Once we get more of the younger, maybe oncologists who are interested, I get contacted. I'm sure you guys do too.
For sure.
Once they see the value in maintaining metabolic health, really promoting that, we're going to see the changes coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think, epigenetics too is an emerging study. We're working on that at MaxLove, of just, taking, we can talk about how you should eat, what you should eat, but if you can actually lock into what the body's asking for in some ways, with epigenetics, what's expressing, what's not, and how you can manage that or help that with food is going to be huge moving forward.
And the normal versus the cancer cell metabolism.
Right.
If you look at normal metabolism and then you look at cancer cell metabolism, so many of those pathways have been, like they say, hijacked by the cancer cells, so that the internal signaling that's going on is just demanding changes that support the tumor. Like, so many times I have people say they want a glutamine restricted diet, or they'll get in, my tumor likes glutamine, and so I want to just keep it out, and they don't understand. And this is one of the things I like to educate on, that it's activities within the cancer cell that have changed. So the cancer cells are actually making their own glutamine. It's like, oh, we're not getting it, then we're just going to make it. Yeah. It's like, oh, well, we're not getting it, we're going to recycle it. Oh, we're not getting it, let's steal it from the tumor microenvironment. We're going to take it from outside and bring it in. So the body has all kinds of, like, adaptations to be able to do this for normal cells, but the cancer cells have hijacked that, and they have upregulated. They have, like, the signaling has just gone crazy, and this is what they want to do. They just want to be, making more of themselves, and tumor getting big. So what we're trying to do with this is with something like glutamine, is manage when and how much. So it's like, you need enough. If you need it for your immune system, you need it for your gut, especially with some of these systemic cancers where the treatments are just trashing everything from stem to stern, as far as the lining of the intestinal tract, the digestive tract. And so we want to not feed the cancer, but if we can quiet down that system. So that's all that thing about fasting around chemotherapy that you see with adult cancers, quieting everything down. And so the body then just has to use what's internal to that. But yeah, it's like every time you exercise, you're breaking down muscle tissue and releasing nutrients into the bloodstream. And the nutrients include things like glutamine. And so then the beauty of this, though, is at the same time it's doing this, the muscle tissue is asking for those nutrients back in order to rebuild the muscle tissue. That's how we operate. So so in staying active, we're putting stuff into the system, but we're also directing it back. So we can have foods that have sufficient glutamine in them, as long as we manage when we're getting them. That's one of the things I look at. It's like, people traditionally, dinner's the biggest meal of the day, and maybe they're going to bed in an hour and a half or 2 hours afterwards. So they're putting all of that nutrition into their body, all of that glutamine, and proteins digest slower. So they're putting that all in at a time where there's no competition for that. So, just sleeping, where's that going to go?
Yeah, movement's important. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think just for our listeners, what you're speaking to when you talk about glutamine is it's an amino acid, an essential
Thank
amino
you.
acid. No, and I think it's going to what Dr. Seyfried says in that a lot of the metabolic theory of cancer is that there's fermentable fuels, like what you were saying, that a cancer cell doesn't need oxygen. So in the absence of oxygen, that means cancer cells are fermenting. And his research says that the only fermentable fuels for a cancer cell are glucose and glutamine. So a lot of his strategy is limiting
Yeah.
glucose and then pulsing, limiting glutamine, and that's kind of like how you manage it. So when you speak about glutamine, a lot of people are interested in restricting glutamine because of the idea that it is a fermentable fuel for cancer cells. So just that
Yes.
background information about.
Yeah. So the thing about glutamine is it's one of those that's a non-essential amino acid under normal conditions. It becomes essential under certain conditions.
Yeah.
But non-essential, which means that the body can make it.
Right.
And it can recycle
make it itself.
Yeah. So it's not, Dr. Seyfried's research has found that there are other fermentable fuels too. So you have glucose as the fermentable fuel in the cytoplasm of the cell, and that creates lactate, and the lactate can be recycled within the cell to be used in making the structures within the cell that the cell needs in order to replicate. So it fuels those activities. In the mitochondria of the cell, which we think of as like the little powerhouse of the cell, that's where we're making most of the energy that runs our body. Normally, the glucose would be broken down a little bit first, then it would enter that pathway in the mitochondria and be made into a lot of fuel. But with cancer cells, that process is disrupted. The mitochondria are dysfunctional.
Yeah.
So they have to revert to the more primitive form of fermentation as well. They may be using oxygen. It may look like they're using oxygen, but they're not using it efficiently to make ATP. And what Dr. Seyfried has found that there are several of these amino acids that can enter the mitochondria and be fermented. And again, it's an acidic waste product. Cancer likes to thrive. It thrives in acidic environment. So you have the lactic acid forming in the cytoplasm, and you have these other acids forming in the mitochondria, and again, used for cell structures and growth. So you have this perfect storm of creating an environment in and around the cell that supports the proliferation of cancer. So when people think that they're going to reduce they hear this, cancer thrives in an acidic environment, and they think they're going to reduce that by drinking alkaline water. It's like, well, no, it doesn't work. It's the cell metabolism. You've got to shut down the fermentable fuels. You got to reduce that in order to reduce the acidity in and around the tumor.
No. That's a really powerful point, and something that is confusing to people. We get that question a lot. And it also brings me to the glutamine question, and the question of like trying to pull these very specific levers. One thing that I learned in my own journey with long COVID is, and my genetic SNPs has to do with the gut repair and what I need to do to be able to support my gut, lower inflammation. And so it makes me think of more of what I heard from you was almost a more like holistic approach, right? So if we are looking at being able to create a terrain or environment where we're lowering inflammation, right? Are we not impacting are we not making a positive impact in that we're creating an environment that's less conducive to the growth of the cancer? So yes, maybe there might be glutamine involved in supporting that gut lining, but there has to be a relationship there with lowering inflammation in the body, and therefore making it more difficult for the cancer to grow, as opposed to trying to like pull all these very specific levers and not understanding the consequences of that kind of in the entire terrain.
Right. So you get, I get a lot of times people will say anti-inflammatory foods. What foods are anti-inflammatory? And I go, let's look at it as what foods don't create the inflammation to start with.
Right.
So, sugars and starch, cheap refined starches, they're going to create inflammation. They're going to create problems in the gut. They're going to create problems of metabolism within the body with insulin resistance and the accumulation of fat stores. And then the fat's going to pump out all these inflammatory cytokines. And it's again the perfect storm for this. So, but that kind of what you said about pulling specific levers. I get a lot of questions these days about one specific amino acid. So it used to just be about the glutamine, and now we hear, and you've been hearing too, we've had some of this discussion already about methionine. So methionine is an essential amino acid. That means that our bodies can't make it. We can only get it from the food that we eat or from a limited amount of recycling we can do within the body. So when I have people say methionine restricted diet, I think in their heads, they don't want any foods with methionine. And of course, animal proteins are high in both glutamine and methionine, but that's the beauty behind managing the proteins that are in the diet. And you get a handle on that. It's not like you have to do, like I said, you don't have to do that to the second decimal point. You get a handle on what to do. But with methionine restriction, I know Sam in the world of DIPG, they're looking at that a lot. And in my world of adult brain tumors, there are some that are probably very methionine addicted. And there are ways to figure that out, but it's just another whole area of uncertainty of who is and who isn't. There's some tests that you can do, some labs that you can look at. There's some methylation pathways that you can get some information on. But again, there's so much of it that ends up being cobbled together. So just a general response for anybody thinking about methionine restriction is you got to do this under close monitoring, or you do it for a short period of time. If your body is up for it and you can fast for 4 or 5 days, that's methionine restriction. That's limiting glutamine and methionine to the cancer cells. But there's a downside, and that's also limiting it to the normal cells. And you need those normal cells on board in order to support overall metabolism. So I proceed very carefully with that one until we have a system of metabolic oncologists that can make these. Yes. There's a guy named Rainer Clement. He's very keto. He's a German. And I've had this conversation with him, and it was just so enlightening. He's, about follicular non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And my assumption was it was glutamine added, because that's what I had heard. And he said, well, you can do some other testing to look at it, because some is more glucose dependent, some is more glutamine dependent, and some is sort of more of a balance they're getting, And it's like, oh my God, another layer.
One.
And who's going to be able to access this testing? It's hard enough for my clients to get, an insulin, a fasting insulin, or a homocysteine or a ferritin. They got to beg their team, and maybe they have to, they're not going to get it from the oncologist, but maybe they can get it from their GP, or in your case, a pediatric. In our case, I'm sure our pediatrician would have ordered. He did order insulin for us, but that was the only one I knew of. I didn't know to look at homocysteine or ferritin. So I don't know what kind of pathways were active in a cancer that had developed in such a young child. I don't know. He had a birth defect. He had I should call it a birth anomaly called Poland syndrome, which is associated with disorders of the hypothalamic pituitary axis. And what is the worst scenario there in that axis is the brain tumor that he had. Optic pathway, pituitary, hypothalamus, everything was involved. And that's what made also his tumor unresectable under normal conditions. We had a surgeon that tried it and didn't get anywhere really.
No, I mean, even Camila's epigenetics, like we tested it, and she has a lot of methylation issues. That's what we learned. And again, we didn't know what to do with that information, but it is obviously now, as we, get more educated, it is tied to methionine. Methionine is very important for methylation pathways. And, I appreciate you bringing it up. It's going to be, I feel like, something we're going to have to keep talking about, as research keeps coming out, what labs to get tested, how to monitor. Like you said, a metabolic oncologist would be amazing. And I know we'll talk to Dr. Nasha too, because she's probably one of the closest things to a metabolic oncologist. And she's doing great work in trying to educate people in her approach. she's only one person, but I know she has a lot of information on this as well that we'll
Mhm.
hopefully talk to her about. So that's larger conversations coming.
Yeah.
And I want to be mindful of time too, but
Okay.
to go back to those top 3 things that we would advise, a parent who's considering this for their child. I know you said support. I think that's really important. Like you don't have to be doing this alone.
Mhm.
We always advocate like to tell your oncology team
Mhm.
to mention it to them that you want to go this route. And
Mhm.
depending on their answer, they could be an advocate for you, or ultimately it's your choice what you feed your child at home.
Right.
But that you are not alone. Everything with MaxLove Project, we have a space within our app that is specific to ketogenic diets, with other parents who are
Mhm.
doing it. We have education. Again, number 2 is educating, finding those resources that are really valuable,
And
rooted in
number
science.
3 is
Mhm.
Yeah, what's
engagement.
number 3? Engagement.
Engaging the
Yeah.
whole family in this. And
Yeah.
Audra, I
Yeah.
saw that in action at your house.
Yep.
So, it's a beautiful thing when you can do it and not
Yep.
look at it as an obstacle.
Right.
Right.
I think the family dynamics can be extremely challenging at times, especially if there's a mix of ages.
Mhm.
So that is something, that's another reason why I like people to get family support from you. But I mean, there are some simple things that, kids don't like to have their fingers pricked, but if you set up a competition, if
Mhm.
all of you prick your finger and
That's
you say
right.
the one with the highest ketones gets, well, who's going to have the highest ketones?
Exactly. That was our
So,
secret. Totally. And it was
yeah.
amazing to see everyone light up, and as a parent, you have to think, what do you think your child would do if you refuse to get the finger prick and
Yeah.
you refuse to eat the way they eat and you refuse all of that stuff? Because you're modeling, they learn more from us than anyone
Right.
else.
Mhm.
But you'd be surprised what this diet will do for you. It's
Right.
not right what the situation is doing to you. Both Justin and I found really profound benefits from going down this path with
Oh,
Max.
definitely. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I do encourage everyone. It's just like not every kid in the family has to be strictly ketogenic, but
Right.
get the
Eat
junk
similar
out,
foods.
be
Yeah. Eat
modeling the
similar
better
foods.
stuff. And
Yep.
like I tell families, your other kids aren't going to be deprived. They're
Right.
going to find it. They're going to find it in the environment because
Yep.
it's everywhere. And
That's
and
right.
it was like, yeah,
That's right.
being the diet police at like
Yeah.
classroom parties, having to go in.
Yeah.
It's like, this is one funny story. It's well, funny in a sad kind of way, but another mom and I were both at this party for different reasons. Her child had a peanut allergy. And so she was there to make sure no peanuts. There had been something sent out ahead of time that said no peanuts, and something comes in the door, and it turns out to be like peanut butter cupcakes. And this mom, so the aide that was in the class, she whisked those away to the back room. They weren't going to get served to the kids. And the mom that had made them said, well, why not? I don't have any peanuts in there. And the mom was there, but you had peanut butter in it, and peanut butter is made
Stop it.
from peanuts.
Mhm.
No, I'm dead serious. And we just looked at one another when the mom goes, whatever. So she was just like, not at all happy that her food wasn't going to get eaten by all the kids in the classroom. But it's like the level of education that you have to do when your kids are outside. It's everywhere.
Mhm.
Yep.
So it's like, that it doesn't have one of the biggest things, and I'm sure you see that, is gluten-free. Gluten-free is not carb-free.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's the opposite.
Mhm.
Unless it's almond flour,
Exactly.
it's the opposite.
Yeah. Very high carb usually.
Yeah.
Very, very high carb. Yeah. Yeah.
So
No,
that's the 3
Yeah.
things. The third
No,
one
I
is,
I think that's helpful.
the
And I
family
think
support.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think to that last point, I would, encourage families. My family, my kids still ask for recipes that I made. Like I found recipes for Camila and she loved them. My kids still ask for them. Like it's nothing
Awesome.
also just that you're depriving your family of. It's definitely difficult, to go away from how our culture, our society eats. But once you're in it and once you're like exploring it, once you're making some of these things, you realize how much your body likes it, your taste buds like it. It's really powerful in that way too. So I would also just encourage families, experiment with your families,
And
you know,
and it
find
is
different
like,
things. Yeah.
it is like having a kid with a peanut allergy or some kind of allergy like
Yeah.
that. So it's like people understand that if a kid with a peanut allergy eats something with peanuts in it, they're going to be in trouble. They don't understand, not even in my family did they understand that the bread they gave my son while I was like using the ladies' room at a restaurant one night, it's like, I come back, what are you doing? What are you doing? Oh, it's just one piece of bread.
No.
So it's like,
Yeah.
it's the education, you can only go so far, and then you just have to treat it like a peanut allergy.
Yeah.
In the hospital, they actually catalog Max as having a glucose allergy. That was
Mhm.
the only way they could like put it in the system
Yeah.
to allow there to be
Yeah.
attention paid, you know?
Yeah, I remember that doing that with smoothies at the hospital. Just like they had all these smoothie for like, I forget, they just had a smoothie menu for kids
Yeah.
who couldn't eat, but I had to like cut and splice the smoothie to make her one that was keto friendly. And they also had to flag it, be like, this is why, you know, that
right.
ordering it this way.
Yeah.
Of it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I
This
think that's, I
great
really
conversation.
appreciate you, Miriam, you know, showing up continually, you know, in this space. And, you know, you're a constant inspiration for me, you know, both of you for
I
me
am
have
so
helped
grateful
me.
that you guys are out there because we need these resources. So,
Yeah.
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 We
So
love you, Miriam, and appreciate you so much.
But yeah, thank you. And I think hopefully we'll continue to have these conversations. Like I said before, this is just an area that we're scratching the surface of, in my opinion. So we would always appreciate your expertise in the space and having these conversations so that parents can, you know, learn from us moms. All we are is moms too at the end of the day, you know, just trying to figure it out. So even in the future, we'd love to continue these conversations if you're open.
Yeah, I'm all in on that.
Thank
So
you. Thank you.
wonderful
Thank you
to
for your
talk with you
time
today.
Yeah, I'm gonna, or Audrey, you stop the, or I think I can do it. All right.
Okay. Thank you, Miriam, so much.